Radio Retro Future.
Greetings, ladies and gentlemen. This is Bonsert of Radio Retro Future back here with another writing workshop. This is more of a lecture on the finer details of writing, and in particular we're going to be talking about world design in low and high concept. And if you don't know what any of those terms means, don't worry, I will be explaining that today as well. And what I mean by world design, most people call world design world building. I think for me, world building is a very different process. We will not be talking about that here. I might do so in the future. Talk about world design, I talk about the actual physical description of your worlds, where the tribes, the locations, the buildings, the visual aesthetics of the factions, that is what I call world design. Today I want to start with explaining what low concept is, and from that point on I'm gonna delve into what high concept is and how the two are related to one another, and why there's also so much confusion on the topic. So low concept worlds. Low concept stories are basically the stories that follow the typical hero's journey. This is, if you watch booktubers, they'll always talk about the hero's journey and how characters should always follow the hero journey. Well, I want to dispel that a little bit today, not entirely. I am of the opinion stories do not have to follow this hero journey idea to a T. A matter of fact, when it comes to high concept writing, it can be detrimental. Okay, so the hero's journey basically states that the character starts as a normal boy with no special things, but then there is this revelation that either he is like a chosen one, or like he's going on a heroic journey to save a loved one. And it often tends to start that we have the normal world, as in this depiction, which is like the place of order, and then we delve into the world of chaos. He goes through all these trials and tribulations and changes, where the old version of the character dies and is replaced by a stronger, more powerful version of said character. Now, these are heroes' journeys, people who develop into heroic characters with heroic traits. So you can also imagine that all these series tends to have like a very good ending, where good triumphs. And one of the nifty things about high concept is it doesn't have to be the case. Therefore I say that in high concept, following this journey to a T can be detrimental, but it doesn't mean that this is completely absent. One of the assumptions about high concept is that it lacks characterization, that it lacks strong characters. I'm gonna dispel that today. But how characters are written, the approach to character writing is different. So we have low concept worlds, which are built differently from high concept worlds, but there are similarities, of course. But what is a low concept world? Well, again, it's about the hero's journey, which means that there are all kinds of locations where our hero needs to travel to, or needs to pass, or are obstacles for our characters. Now, the character in a hero's journey often starts in the lands of order. These are the lands that often have civilizations, they have cities, they have peaceful communities. That's a very important one when you talk about urban environments, settled communities, cities with defensive structures, etc. Fields of wheat, all that good stuff. That brings us to the next, is that we also have the places of chaos. Again, these are stories usually about good versus evil, and this is represented in the world design. You have the lands of order and you have the lands of chaos, which are often represented by untamed lands. They're often natural environments. They have tribal, primitive communities, and we have gangs in the lands of chaos. And this is important when you write about cities with urban decay, street gangs and such. Now, of course, there's a lot of peril, there's a lot of ruins. Those are often very much present, and of course predators, monsters, and of course the local populations, such as gangs. So that is the bipolar nature of the hero's journey worlds. Now, each of these lands will often have their focal points. Now, if you know anything about media, you recognize these immediately. We have, of course, the Tower of Sauron in the heart of and Mount Doom is another one. These are very important locations, and they kind of also symbolize the presence of evil in that land. The moment that either of these two landmarks are destroyed, order is being restored in that land. This is important later, by the way, in Mount Doom. Now here I have Minas Tirith here. This is, of course, like the main capital of one of the human kingdoms. And we also see the walls, we see the orderly structures. A little bit, and also we kind of see this vanquishing of nature as this. I think the city is literally carved out of the stone, so we also have that symbology, triumph of civilization over nature. Now, of course, we also have here, this is from a children's cartoon show, He-Man, and we have Castle Grayskull here. Now, interesting about this one is that usually death's heads are, of course, references to chaos, but in this case, it's the home of the good guys. But then we have like Snake Mountain, again, we have the volcano, we have got the forces of nature, we've got references to the demonic, we've got monsters, so it has like encapsulated all the elements of chaos in one single building, while Grayskull at least has the medieval towers, which are again more signs of civilization. They seem to be growing out of these roots here. Now, then there's always a kind of like in the hero's journey, they call this the threshold. But the threshold is often represented by a physical boundary of one form or another. Now, I show walls and rock formations here, but it can also be rivers and other natural dividing lines like, I don't know, channels, canyons, anything that keeps order and chaos separate. Like, they're literally the border between order and chaos. Like, we've got the Great Wall from Game of Thrones here, which is guarded by the NIGHTWATCH, and they keep the wildlings out. Now we've got, of course, the Great Tower of China, which is, again, to keep the savages out of the civilized Chinese Empire. And then we've got, of course, Attack on Titans. This is Wall Maria, which is protecting this part of the city. And again, it's to keep the Titans out. So we've got two basic arcs. And again, they're related to the lens of order and chaos. Whereas you have chaos comes from the protagonists, where invaders are destroying the lands of order, like in Lord of the Rings and Game of Thrones. And, you know, you've got, of course, in many fantasy games, you have like the raiders coming to murder the family of the main protagonist. And then he goes like on this quest on revenge, or tries to figure out why his village was attacked, because often that place has a secret. More on that later. And then we have that the protagonist heads for chaos. Now, the protagonist can go voluntarily, like Mario saving Princess Peach. Mario goes into the castle of Bowser to save the princess. We've got Jonas and the Whale, which is our typical version of that story. But then we also have the variations where the bad guys come, they take the family and the main character away into the lands of chaos, like what happens to Conan. You know, he is a kid, he gets captured by raiders who sell him as a slave, and there he becomes like this very strong man who can push this wheel all by himself. And that's kind of the start of him becoming a hero when he finally rebels against his owners. Now, we also have the deconstruction arcs. Oh boy, I just couldn't help myself. Yeah, where you have like, where they're subverting your expectations, and when you read these, you immediately understand how trite they actually are. Where we have that the protagonist goes to the land of quarters to bring order, only to learn that he was the bad guy all along. The protagonist goes into the land of chaos to avenge his loved ones, only to learn they were the bad guys all along. Yeah, okay, and this basically goes on. But this is what you see in a lot of modern media. You know, we're subverting your expectations, we're deconstructing the hero's journey. But you can immediately see by just looking at this how absolutely boring this is. I mean, it's not into itself a bad thing, but if you do it over and over and over again, yeah, it becomes kind of like very boring. And of course, who are you supposed to root for if we find out that our main characters are actually the bad guys in the whole story? Yeah, I mean, it can work, but the execution overall is very bad. Let's talk more about locations within the Lands of Order, right? Now, the first one that we already mentioned before is the home. It often gets destroyed by the bad guys. It's gone. So we often have that the character is leaving it or forced to leave it. But yeah, it often also can be a secret or a symbol of power, let's say Minas Tirith. Then we have the base, or the hub as I call it. Now the hub is very interesting because the hub can also often be the home of the characters. Now I was a massive fan of the A-Team as a kid, and still kinda am. I kinda want to bring that back in the role-playing game we're working on. And they have this black van with the iconic red stripe on the side, and this is where the characters basically live in. Not entirely, but it's what they use to get from one place to another and start their adventures. So it doesn't need to be a landmark, although the Batcave is definitely a hub. The fire station of the Ghostbusters is definitely a hub. So these places often, if they're not mobile, they often have garages. You see this, like the parents' home, like in Stranger Things, and in one of my latest books, a train called the Jean Gastel, that the Casket Girls use as their mobile base. Now, what's also interesting about the base, or the hub, we mentioned Castle Grayskull that often gets attacked by Skeletor. Trouble often comes to them instead. Not always. There's more to it, we're going to go over that, but it's a lot about when it comes to defensive structures, bases, the trouble comes to them instead of the other way around, which you would expect with the hero's journey. So I am quite honestly not sure if I should put it here, but more on that later. So we also have locations that are chaotic. Well, we already talked about the gateways to chaos. I mean, again, the thresholds, as you could call them, those boundaries that we discussed, yeah, they're kind of like gateways to chaos as well. You kind of can see them as, you know, two sides of the same coin kind of deal, where one side of the wall is good, the other side of the wall is bad. Then, of course, we have the enemy lair. I already mentioned Bowser's Castle, and of course the Death Star. I mean, one of these more iconic than the Death Star at the moment. And then you have places of revelation on this. They're not always there either, and they can be very subtle, right? You as a viewer or reader may not even really notice that these spaces are very important. Often don't get the attention that they deserve either. But yeah, we have the alleyway from Batman, where he has his kind of like call to action, his big motivation. The Sword in the Stone is one such place. And Yoda's Swamp, of course, where Luke gets his revelation, his premonition that he is Vader's son. And now, of course, finally we have the place of confrontation. Now, these are usually more for spectacle, like the Emperor's throne room, the battle on the volcano planet in The Revenge of the Sith. But still, they need to be memorable places. They deserve the spectacle. That's an important facet I'll get into a little bit later. Now, you also have like the optional, we've got our place of reflection. Like, this is often like very cheap scenes where a character goes to a gravesite to visit a friend or a parent. He makes this vow or reflects on the past. That's why I call it a place of reflection. And again, I already mentioned the quest locations, which can be just things to stretch out a book. Really, there's like a MacGuffin, they need to get it, or they need a bit of information and they need to get it out of a person. Often not very memorable things, but I mean, yeah, sometimes you just need to pad out a story. That's kind of the issue with them. And with that said, I want to go into high concept worlds, if you don't mind. And again, one of these high concept worlds we're gonna be using a little bit here is the Casket Girls, which is my latest book that is now available for sale about mechs fighting aliens. But folks, don't forget we currently are preparing a Kickstarter for our upcoming role-playing game, another high concept product. And you can follow it on associationofishtar.com/KS. We're nearly at 75 followers. We'll be picking up our promotional tours coming months, and we hope to launch at the start of October during Spiel, which is the biggest gaming event. And of course, if you enjoy this type of content, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. I need to say that for the YouTube algorithm. It's just the way it is. And with that, let's get into high concept world building. And with that, we're back to high concepts. So, what is high concept and why is it so different from the hero's journey? Well, and that's because high concept are stories centered around a single premise. What if? And the thing with that is that it's very thematic, and this is very hard to explain. I mean, the concept is easily enough, oh, it's just a story with a what-if premise. And that's where most people immediately stop, because they have no clue on how to explain how this is different from the low-concept stories that we discussed in the first half of this video. Now, and one other thing is that whenever you explore what others might call speculative fiction, aka science fiction, it's also to do so immersively, and that is where a lot of people, especially who have no experience with high concept, go very wrong. However, that said, because these are highly thematic stories, often moralistic stories, they are more suitable for short stories and small scale plots. A lot of people frown upon short stories. However, we must remember that some of the most famous stories in fiction, and especially science fiction, are all short stories. However, some of the most famous books are also very high concept. But today we're focusing on the world design, and where the difference lies is that in low concept the world really evolves around the hero's journey, about creating those hurdles and that upward climb to the climax. In high concept, it's very different, because the worlds in high concept are often characters into themselves, but they can also be extremely small. A high concept can be a room, it can be a movie like Rear Window or The Fly, or but the world can also be a greater location. Then you have often places like Deadwood, Hell on Wheels, which is also a western, Smallville, the young Superman, The Cube, which takes place into a larger structure, and of course Star Trek, which, well, yeah, there is this whole galaxy, but most takes place upon the starship. And the world can also be a character's head, like Inside Out, famous movie, and Herman's Head, which is a comedy from the 90s that I happened to watch. I thought it was funny at the time. I don't know if I would watch it again. But yeah, you've got various flavors in HC, just like in low concept, where it's often about a character going into the lands of chaos. In HC, it's a little bit different. It are more like character studies, so it's often things like men against the unknown, men in the system, a man in a situation, man in a dilemma, a man confronted with a mystery. So it's about a person in a particular situation, like the Predator, Terminator, Alien, Lovecraft stories, where you basically take a bunch of, in the case of 90s heroes, commandos that can take out like an entire drug cartel all by themselves, and then they face up against this alien that kills nearly all of them. And then we have like the system, which is very popular, which is especially in science fiction, where you have a person in this strange worlds, and we see how life goes on inside those systems. This is highly speculative stuff. But they often have very interesting world building and often very interesting world design. Daybreakers, for instance, is about a futuristic society with vampires and what they would look like. How do they feed? How do they stay alive? How does the blood business work, as happens in that movie? Like, we can have criminals running a scam, right? And we have people running a business. We can have a middle-class neighborhood, a community with a secret. This system is often the thing that's explored. That's kind of what I mean by saying, well, the world in itself is kind of a character that kind of like developed in a particular way. And you often see in these stories that the characters are trying to figure out the history of this place they're visiting, which has this secret that they need to uncover, so they need to question people and go on this investigation with them. And that is what I love about high concept in particular, and that's also what I do primarily in my own work. But then, so we have to understand here that we have a system that is working. Usually when we come into the story, the system is working, but then something happens, and in some cases there's like the hero comes to town. Now this is what happens in all the Bioshock games, where you are this outsider coming into this city, and then you need to figure out what happened. So again, you have that mystery aspect, that exploration aspect, that investigation angle. But you can also have like you've got a community and then villains arrive and they start extorting the place. Everything was working fine, but then the peace is disturbed. The chaos usually always comes into the system somehow. Sometimes it are characters, sometimes it's just that the system starts to malfunction. We have this in Total Recall, Apollo 13, The Martian, where a man gets stranded on Mars, and one of my favorite science fiction short stories from the 1920s, The Machine Stops, which is literally about that. But of course we first start with like, this is what the system does when it's working, and then we see its degradation into chaos. And then of course they have the themes of the system turns against the characters, kind of very similar. That's why I also included Total Recall in there. But you know, also Minority Report, which is about a system that predicts murders. And one of these cops that's using this system to prevent murders is then accused himself of committing a murder. And now everyone is after him because of the system. Then we have the chaos usually comes to the protagonist's hub. I already mentioned this. To clarify, like in horror, you know, you have like this peaceful middle-class neighborhood, but then the slasher village comes. In comedy, you've got Home Alone, you know, a classic. A boy is home alone, then these burglars come. We've got this tour de force of sadism. The TARDIS often attracts evil. Star Trek Enterprise often gets attacked. And on westerns, we see this a lot. Deadwood, Hell on Wheels, disaster films, you know, how much more chaos can you get? And of course, well, romance, where, oh man, I tried reading some romances, but they are so boring and predictable. Because they're basically all about this. Some dangerous man enters a woman's life, takes her away, and then she has to tame him or fix him or woo him. But yeah. So, we have a system, the system has a problem, and now we need to find a solution. We need to defeat the slasher villains, we need to get rid of the banditos, we need to get rid of the raiders. So, how do they solve that problem? They can do it by themselves, again, Home Alone. They can find a hero to solve the problem. This happens in Magnificent Seven and Yojimbo. You don't see this as much anymore. Although you could argue that the A-Team is very much like this. Now I think about it, where they are these mercenaries that work for people who are in deep trouble. So the trouble has already found these people, then they hire the A-Team and then the A-Team helps them. So yeah, the A-Team is also a great example of that. Then you have like people like fleeing for the problem. Fleeing for the problem, usually that's at the start of the film, where the characters are fleeing, but then they get pulled back in and then they need to confront the enemy anyway. But there are definitely movies that are just about getting away from the problem. I mean, yeah, that can also be a solution. But wait, you say, doesn't all of this also happen in low concept? And yes, it does. And this is why describing the distinction between low and high concept is so complex. Yes, there are characters in high concept films. And yes, these characters are going through developments. Usually it is they start with they love the system. Mortal Engines, you know, at first he loves the system, but then he gets betrayed. And then he drops off the ship, then he wants to go back home because he believes still that the system is great, and then he realizes, oh, actually it's not great. Now, Mortal Engines, I made some videos on that, what I think of that plot, because anyway, the point I want to make here is that there is no formulaic structure to high concept like there is in low concept. There's a particular balance that needs to be structured right, good and memorable high concept stories, in particular longer stories, and that is what we're gonna be talking about in the next video. But as I said, that is for next time. This week I'll be preparing for a convention in Rotterdam. Meanwhile, we're working on finalizing the alpha for our role-playing game. So the next seminar, I hope to have it premiere in the next weekend. If you've got any questions in relation to this video, do submit them, so maybe I can add a little Q&A at the end of that video. So yeah, stay tuned for that. Again, our Kickstarter is currently in pre-launch, so make sure you follow that. If you're not into the role-playing games, there also will be versions of all the novels. Our playtest is also ready for people who join our Discord. So if you're curious to our take on steampunk role-playing, go follow the link down in the description and join the playtesters. You also get like access to our lore and other stuff, and stuff that we want to do in the final version of the game. Because what we're gonna do, we're gonna first finish a light version, as it were. That one we'll try and attempt to sell on places like Spiel. Meanwhile, we're working on the full edition for the role-playing game. That's gonna be on Kickstarter. And of course, we're working on a lot of other content. We're working on new STLs. We are going to commission more of those as well. If you want to have all your favorite steampunk tropes in the game, make sure that you join our Discord so you can comment and make requests. So yes, we are looking forward to your input. And with that, ladies and gentlemen, I'm gonna bid you adieu. And as always, make things your way.